12 creepy and completely true unsolved mysteries. 1. The Phoenix Lights. On the night of March 13, 1997, Phoenix resident Michael Chrysostom shot amateur video of lights flying over his home in a V formation. Before I knew it, an entire display of lights comes on. I got a little excited at that time, and I called my wife. It was really quite unusual. Michael Chrysostom was not the only eyewitness that evening. Thousands of Arizona residents claimed to have seen the exact same formation of lights. Were the lights UFOs? Many of the eyewitnesses were immediately convinced. Not surprisingly, an official explanation soon emerged from Captain Drew Sullins of the Air National Guard, the 104th Fighter Squadron of the Maryland Air National Guard's 175th Wing was conducting a night training exercise in the vicinity of the mysterious lights. What they were doing was dropping night illumination flares over the North Tactical Range at Luke Air Force, and a lot of people seem to think that those flares could in fact have been the quote-unquote mysterious lights. It seemed plausible that flares would be the cause for the sightings. However, there was a problem with the military's explanation. The military said the flares were dropped between 9 o'clock and 10 p.m. However, the most impressive sighting occurred between 8 o'clock and 9 p.m. Taken together, these eyewitness accounts seem to indicate that there was something other than flares in the Phoenix sky that night. At 8:10 p.m., nearly an hour before the military began dropping flares, Ross Nichol and his family were driving on Highway 89 when they spotted the lights overhead. I saw some lights in a very small pattern. And what they really looked like at that point was just dim stars, several of them in a very tight pattern. They were white like stars when they were coming towards us. And at that point, they changed colors and went from white to red. They were just overhead at that point, and they were, in my estimation, not very high off the ground. I'm guessing 1,000 feet. And there was absolutely no sound. During the whole time, from the start to finish, there was absolutely no sound. 20 minutes later, a commercial airline pilot and his wife were driving home after dinner when they too spotted the lights. For professional reasons, the pilot agreed to tell his story only if his identity was concealed. I've been flying for 29 years now, and I'm not used to looking up in the sky and not being able to figure out what I'm seeing. I looked at it then and tried to make it into an airliner. I realized again, it's going too slow, and there's no noise at all. And then the next thing that struck me is that, man, why would his landing lights be pointed straight down? Given the locations of the sightings, the lights appeared to be heading south. At 8:30 p.m., Ozma Linderman and her boyfriend were just settling down for the evening when they had their own encounter. It was very clear in my mind that it was one solid craft. The lights were traveling too perfectly spaced apart, and there was a void clearly between the lights that blacked out the stars when it came down. The whole thing just slowed, I don't know, maybe to a stop, or it hovered for a second, and then, what looked like one solid red oval object, it just turned red and shot straight up and disappeared, gone, completely gone. At 8:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the military began dropping flares, trucker Gary Morris spotted the lights while driving. To me it didn't look like floodlights. They didn't really look like spotlights. There was something different about them that I had never seen before. Between 8 o'clock and 9 p.m. the Phoenix lights had traveled over 300 miles and been seen by hundreds of witnesses. An hour passed. Then at 10 p.m. Michael Chrysostom shot the video that would provide the basis for the military's official explanation. If you lived in Phoenix, these flares, some of them were dropped at 14,000 and 15,000 feet. They burn very bright. They burn for 5 to 6 minutes. They are suspended by a parachute, and it's a large flare. You would be able to see those flares, I would imagine, for 150, maybe even 200 miles. The commercial pilot is convinced the lights he saw were not flares. I've seen them from the ground. I've seen them from the air, and these weren't flares. And probably the major reason that these were almost certainly not flares dropped by the military was they're dangerous. So they would never, ever be dropped over a population center. Will the mystery of the Phoenix Lights ever be solved? For the military, the case is closed. But for hundreds of eyewitnesses the question remains, did the Phoenix Lights come from somewhere beyond the stars? 2. Solway Firth astronaut. On a bright summer's day in 1964, a Carlisle fireman took a photo of his daughter that created headlines around the world. 50 years later, are we any closer to solving the mystery of the Solway Spaceman? We went on a normal outing and picked our spot, Jim Templeton recalled in a BBC interview before his death in 2011. We sat down and I said, "Now I'll get some photos of you with a new dress on," never expecting this to happen. By this he meant worldwide media attention and decades of debate over the mysterious figure shone behind his daughter, Elizabeth. For ufologists, it was clear. A white suit. A helmet. A dark visor. Mr. Templeton, they believed, had photographed a spaceman. Other than his wife, Annie, and 2 pensioners sat in a car, the Carlisle fireman maintained he had not seen anyone else that day on Burgh Marsh, overlooking the Solway Firth in Cumbria. It was, he said, only when the chemist who processed his pictures pointed out the shot had been spoiled by a figure, that he realized there had been somebody, or something else, present. Mr. Templeton took it to police in Carlisle, who declared there was nothing out of the ordinary. Film company Kodak said the same and even offered a reward to anyone who could prove the photo was faked. It was never claimed. But a media frenzy soon ensued. It came to the attention of the local paper, the Cumberland News. From the Retran and Ran. It was picked up by the Daily Mail and Express, said Dr. David Clark, an author on UFOs. Mr. Templeton began receiving letters from all over the world. Some people claimed it was a spirit, others believed Jim or his daughter had psychic powers they had not been aware of, Dr. Clark said. It got weirder and weirder and weirder. Then came a visit from 2 men in black who asked to be taken to the spot where the image was taken and referred to each other only as number 9 and number 11. Perhaps the strangest turn of events was a link to the planned launch of a Blue Streak missile in Woomera, South Australia. Just days after Mr. Templeton had taken his photograph, that missile test on the other side of the world was aborted by technicians who reported seeing 2 men in the firing range. Upon later seeing the Solway Spaceman picture on the front page of an Australian newspaper, they were said to be stunned as the figure looked the same as the figures they saw close to the missile. The plot thickened as the Blue Streak had been built at Rathspey Dam in Cumbria, just a few miles from where Mr. Templeton photographed Elizabeth, and as the story gathered momentum it was also claimed a UFO had been seen at Woomera. So could those incidents really be linked to events in Cumbria? No, said Dr. Clark, who has seen the black and white film of the aborted launch. I came across all the paperwork in the MAD files about 5 years ago. It turned out the film was at the Imperial War Museum in London, he said. It looked like a triangle of light, it was clearly lens flare. As for the technician's claim of seeing 2 men in the firing range, he said no photographic record of that sighting exists. Regardless, Mr. Templeton's picture had taped into a public interest fired up by the space race between the United States and Soviet Union. There was a whole series of photos, usually taken with box brownie cameras showing flying saucers like you would see in Doctor Who, War of the Worlds and B-movies, said Dr. Clark. Looking today, some seem naive. But Jim's is such a distinctive picture. The image behind the little girl is so obviously like a NASA astronaut. Sarah Spellman, chairwoman of the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena, ASAP, agrees it was a product of its time. It's an interesting curiosity. Once you see it and make that spaceman connection, it's quite a striking photograph, she said. It struck a chord with the themes of the day and some of the UFO lore of the 1950s and 60s became attached to it. For Dr. Clark, who has a Ph.D. in folklore, stories such as the Solway Spaceman follow a well-worn tradition. Ever since the invention of photography there have been pictures of angels, fairies and spirits, he said. A lot were explained by lens flare or had been tampered with, but it fed into greater spiritualism in the 19th century. If Jim had taken his photo in 1864 instead of 1964, he would have taken it to the spiritualist church and they would have said it showed a ghost. ASAP, which has been investigating the anomalous and paranormal for more than 30 years, still receives a steady stream of new cases annually, although the majority now center around claimed sightings of ghosts rather than UFOs. Our ability to analyze has advanced, but so has the ability to fake things, M. Spellman said. If Jim had taken his photo in 1864 instead of 1964, he would have taken it to the spiritualist church and they would have said it showed a ghost. ASAP, which has been investigating the anomalous and paranormal for more than 30 years, still receives a steady stream of new cases annually, although the majority now center around claimed sightings of ghosts rather than UFOs. Our ability to analyze has advanced, but so has the ability to fake things, M. Spellman said. People now have access to Photoshop and CGI. If someone wants to fake something, they don't have to put a cardboard cutout in the garden and hang it from the fishing line anymore. But what could explain the Solway Spaceman photo? Could it simply be a hoax? Dr. Clark, who met Mr. Templeton in 2002, thinks it unlikely. I came away absolutely convinced he was telling the truth and couldn't explain it himself, although I was less convinced about his Men in Black story. Whoever it was who visited him, I don't think they were from the government. However, the spaceman, Dr. Clark says, is almost certainly not anything of the sort. One of the other stills, taken that day, shows Jim's wife who, according to him, was standing behind him when he took the photo of Elizabeth. He said, I think for some reason his wife walked into the shot and he didn't see her because with that particular make of camera you could only see 70% of what was in the shot through the viewfinder. Annie, he argues, was standing with her back to the camera and the photograph was overexposed, causing her blue dress to look white. Whatever the truth, for Dr. Clark it is a reminder of a more innocent time and he is in no doubt about its importance. People now are much more cynical about these kind of pictures, he said. Back in the 50s and 60s you got a few grainy stills showing extraordinary things. People were much more surprised and willing to suspend disbelief. For me, it's one of the most impressive anomalous images in supernatural investigations and people will still be talking about it in another 50 years. 3. The falling body. Ever since the camera was invented, hundreds or thousands of images have shown something odd within the framing of the shot. A lot of these occurred without the knowledge of either the photographer or subjects of the snapshot itself. Many of the more famous ghost photographs came about by the photographer being in the right place at the right time, mostly without even realizing it. One of the more recent examples of this came to light in or around 2009. From the moment this photograph entered the public domain, debate has raged on its authenticity. This photograph was said to have taken sometime during the 1950s on the day that the whole family moved into a new home. Mr. Cooper had Mrs. Cooper, Grandma Cooper and both children pose for a standard family portrait. What nobody realized during the exposure was that there was a fifth subject captured in the photograph. When the picture was developed, the trespasser was found on the left-hand side of the photograph, either falling from, or hanging from, the ceiling. Mr. Cooper was said to have been adamant that nobody else was in the frame when he took the photograph that night. None of the subjects were aware of their spooky-looking visitor either, as all were posing happily as one might expect. That was the basis behind this now famous photo. Assuming that this Cooper family photo was not, as some insist, a modern Photoshop design, then who else appeared in shot? Could this be an apparition of a former owner or tenant of the house? Nobody could answer that question. Perhaps an alternative explanation is that this image came about as an example of a double exposure. When the photograph was examined more closely, a process called vignetting was discovered in the corners of the picture. While this effect can be the result of lens limitations or certain camera settings, these examples appear too uniform in nature for it to be some random event without manipulation from appropriate software such as Photoshop or PaintShop. Critics also point to the shadows of the subject, insisting that they fall in a direction not according to the given light sources available. These arguments indicate either deception on the part of someone or an honest mistake when faced with an unfortunate double exposure. A hoax or deliberate fabrication would have to be done by someone. The photograph was reportedly uploaded onto the World Wide Web on November 14, 2009 by Saint Giovannino. Once this photograph appeared on Ligotti.net, a fan site for author Thomas Ligotti, titled Family Gathering, an investigation concluded that Sam was not responsible for its creation. Within months the photo was doing the internet rounds on many other paranormal sites. Xavier Ortega posted it on the website Ghost Theory but denied being responsible for its design. The outcome of this uploading did bring this photo to a much wider audience than it had had before. The backstory of the Tex and Cooper family seemed to have been announced sometime after this, first appearing in 2013. Photographers have also speculated why this image was so poorly framed. The obvious subjects were the immediate Lee family, but the image isn't centered on them. It has been suggested that the original image was cropped sometime after development and that the family originally took center stage in the portrait. This could be true, if the picture is genuine, but ever since the photo was revealed, there has been little to no talk about the negatives. That might arouse some suspicion and lend weight to the hoax idea. Whether this is a real image, Photoshop work of art or a simple camera aberration, it is an intriguing image that will surely be around for quite a few years, appearing in YouTube Top 10 Strange Photographs countdowns on a regular basis. 4. Battle of LA. In the early morning hours of February 25, 1942, the sleep of 2 million Americans, in the vicinity of Los Angeles, California, was interrupted by the sound of air raid sirens and anti-aircraft fire. Groggy residents awakened by the high-pitched warnings and the almost ceaseless firings of artillery were rewarded with a light show that made the night into day. Thousands of U.S. Army anti-aircraft searchlights flooded the skies searching for attacking aircraft. They rapidly crisscrossed the black void, desperately hoping their beams would pierce the black veil and disclose the enemy planes. Only weeks after the surprise Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor, the country was not prepared for another sneak attack, as the events of the morning would reveal. Air raid wardens stopped cars and insisted lights be extinguished and home window shades drawn. Neighborhoods and streets were now darkened, denying the enemy easily lit targets. Overhead, silently, a glowing object was moving, slowing as aircraft batteries focused by spotlights began to aim. Katie, a young woman that had volunteered to be an air raid warden, received a phone call from her district supervisor. The supervisor notified her of the alert and then asked if she had seen an object in the sky that was very close to her home. Without hesitation she went to the window and looked into the sky. It was huge. It was just enormous. And it was practically right over my house. I had never seen anything like it in my life, she said. It was just hovering there in the sky and hardly moving at all. It was a lovely pale orange and about the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. I could see it perfectly because it was very close. It was big. Katie added that the anti-aircraft searchlights had completely surrounded the object. They sent fighter planes up and I watched them in groups approach it and then turn away. They were shooting at it, but it didn't seem to matter. Katie states that U.S. fighter planes did attack the object. It was like the 4th of July but much louder. They were firing like crazy but they couldn't touch it. I'll never forget what a magnificent sight it was. Just marvelous. And what a gorgeous color, said Katie. With lights off, residents were now able to witness what was to be known as the Battle of Los Angeles. It was a scene often depicted in future Hollywood science fiction movies. The War of the Worlds seems eerily familiar as U.S. military personnel bombard the space invaders with hundreds of artillery shells, bathed in brilliant light from an array of searchlights. Establish UFO research as nothing but lies and fakery. It couldn't have done a better job. The 37th Coast Artillery Brigade's anti-aircraft batteries began firing at 3:08 a.m. and ceased at 4:14 a.m. In total, nearly 2,000 12.8-pound artillery shells were fired into the night sky at an undisclosed and seemingly indestructible object. The all-clear siren was heard at 7:21 a.m. and the citizenry exhaled a collective sigh of relief. They had survived. The question, as yet unanswered, the elephant in the room, is who or what had attacked? Newspaper reports were scarce. Government and military officials often gave conflicting statements to the press. Local resident witnesses were not interviewed, or the information they gave not deemed credible by the news agencies. The only mention of the event in the Los Angeles Times was a brief article of page 1 which started with the headline, "Chile Throng Watches Shells Bursting in Sky." The article, written by Marvin Miles, went on to describe explosions stabbing the darkness like tiny bursting stars and searchlight beams poking long crisscross fingers across the night sky, and so on. The article did not mention an unknown object or enemy planes. Initial reports cited witnesses seeing formations of warplanes overhead, resulting in dogfights between enemy and U.S. fighter planes. Still others reported seeing flares falling from the sky. A naval intelligence warning indicated an attack was expected within the next 10 hours. Various radar stations picked up an unidentified object 120 miles west of Los Angeles. Immediately following the blackout, the information center was inundated with phone calls from patriotic citizens reporting enemy planes in the sky. A Coast Artillery colonel spotted 25 planes at 12,000 feet over Los Angeles, and others saw a balloon carrying red flares hovering over Santa Monica. The military stated that no U.S. aircraft were in the air. Stories of dogfights were erroneous. Officials explained that because of its limited number of aerial assets, the planes had remained grounded until identified enemy planes could be located and verified. The Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, announced at a February 25 press conference that there was no evidence of enemy planes and that the raid was simply a false alarm. The 4th Air Force believed that there had been no enemy planes over Los Angeles. Finally, the Army issued the War Department report, which indicated that between 1 and 5 unidentified objects had flown over LA. These objects were believed to be Japanese. It's interesting to note that at the conclusion of World War II, the Japanese claimed that they did not send aircraft and did not attack Los Angeles or Southern California in February 1942. Non-military witnesses, some using binoculars, describe a large orange object that moved slowly over the coast between Santa Monica and Long Beach. The object traveled at 20 miles in approximately 30 minutes and then disappeared. An employee of the Los Angeles Herald-Express said that he was certain many of the artillery shells had hit their target, but had had no effect. The photograph above seemingly shows the unknown object, caught in the web of searchlights. Recently, a gentleman from Texas, a G-rated comic no less, claims to have a possible explanation for the event. He states that he is in contact with a member of a race of beings commonly referred to as the Greys. These creatures are approximately 4 feet 4 inches tall, gray in color, have large almond-shaped eyes, small nose and mouth, and have a slight frame. They have been portrayed in Hollywood films, including Close Encounters of the Third Kind. These beings say that they originated on Earth some 300,000 years ago. They describe this time as before Adam. They insist that they are terrestrial, of the Earth, and take exception to being called extraterrestrial. They claim responsibility for the majority of UFO sightings as they are constantly monitoring this planet. According to them, it was one of their ships that was the cause of the excitement on the morning of February 25, 1942. They state that the civil defense fired at least 1,000 anti-aircraft rounds but that their craft was undamaged. Is it possible that after 64 years the mystery of the Battle of Los Angeles has been solved? One could speculate as to why the UFO was floating over the greater LA area, or why its occupants would approach a stand-up comedian to tell their tale. In true Hollywood fashion, one could speculate that perhaps they were auditioning for starring roles in future Hollywood films, or perhaps they were illustrating, albeit dramatically, that they were here first and, as the photo above shows, here to stay. 5. Hessdalen Light. Let us travel back to 1981, when people in Norway's Hessdalen Valley began seeing something strange in their night skies. Colored lights that hung silently sometimes appeared above the valley. Curious onlookers found they were best seen from a slope at the north end of the valley, looking south, and within a few years UFO seekers started converging on Hessdalen. And ever since, there has been one of the lengthiest and most technical of all UFO investigations. Some call them UFOs, some call them ghost lights, some call them Earth lights. None of the researchers have a very good idea what they are, but Hessdalen's residents don't seem too concerned. Theirs is a small, quiet valley, well off the beaten path, and only a few hundred people live in its scattered village. In 1983, Dr. Erling Strand, a UFO researcher, initiated Project Hessdalen as a sort of central framework for all the information gathered by ufologists and other researchers. Strand was convinced that some unknown branch of physics was responsible for the strange lights, and he encouraged as many scientists as he could to join his project. In 1998, Project Hessdalen constructed an automated measurement station on the popular slope, with a clear view of the sky looking south down the valley. It was filled with an astonishing array of technical gear. It included a number of optical cameras, but also magnetometers, weather gear, and equipment for measuring low-frequency electromagnetic radiation. Curiously, the station also includes a random number generator, as a part of the Global Consciousness Project, which seeks to prove that collective human consciousness predicts significant events by altering the output of random number generators. Presumably, this is to test whether the appearance of the Hessdalen lights is some sort of psychic event. What the automated station found is that the lights usually appear in the sky between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., and more often in the winter. Many photographs have been sent to their web server, and can be seen at hessdalen.org. When they appear, the lights each maintain a constant color temperature, and its spectrum remains consistent. The researchers dug in to try and track down this elusive new branch of physics. One of Dr. Strand's associates, astrophysicist and radio astronomer Dr. Massimo Tutorini, wrote of the many theories they explored. Mainly the following possible causes have been considered: ionosphere activity, solar activity, cosmic rays, magnetic monopoles, mini black holes, Rydberg matter, heated nanoparticles, piezoelectricity, and quantum fluctuation of the vacuum state. For none of these causes, except for some aspects of piezoelectricity, was it possible to find a successful proof. Tutorini himself favored a rather colorful explanation. His theory is a bit lengthy, but I'll paraphrase it. He believes that water seeps into fissures in quartz in the valley, and when it freezes, it exerts pressure on the quartz, causing a piezoelectric effect that produces an electrical current. He then jumps to the assumed presence of a hovering ball of plasma, presumably ignited by the piezoelectric current, and the balance of his complex theory involves the characteristics of the plasma. It binds with water vapor, aerosols, and airborne mold spores. It keeps itself in equilibrium due to complex interactions, and keeps its shape due to a presumed cool coat of water and ions. This is not a useful explanation. It is, at best, a pretty far-out hypothesis. It strings together a number of fringe suppositions, few of which are plausible or have ever been observed. For one thing, what the Earth's entire history has told us is that when water freezes inside rock fissures, it cracks the rock. Not once has it ever been observed to leave the rock intact and relieve the energy by producing electrical current that creates hovering plasma balls. For another thing, natural quartz does exhibit the piezoelectric effect, but there's very little quartz in Hessdalen. It's nearly all schist and sandstone. While schist does contain bits of quartz, the schist itself is easily fractured by ice and would relieve any pressure. Finally, the piezoelectric effect in some natural rock is real but barely detectable. To my knowledge, there's no example of such tiny microvoltages causing anything to ignite, either in the cold, wet natural conditions or in a controlled laboratory. What Todorani did was not to look for the source of the lights that were observed. It was, in contrast, an effort that started from the assumption that some unique geophysical process was producing balls of light that floated up out of the ground. He then came up with some hypotheses about how he thinks this might be accomplished. Starting with an explanation, and working backwards to try and match the observations, is the opposite of the way good science should be done. Even if Todorani's hypothesis turned out to be true in every detail, it would still not be an acceptable explanation for the Hessdalen observations. People live throughout the Hessdalen Valley, and none of the observations have ever included lights coming up out of the ground, or even any lights overhead. Indeed, nothing's even been reported to have been witnessed from inside the valley itself. To see the lights, you have to climb up on the hill at the north end of the valley, and look south, across the top of the valley's length. Todorani's hypothesis presumes that his plasma balls are in the valley and floating upwards, in contrast to the observations that simply state the lights are visible to the south of the observation point. A better explanation for why nobody in the valley has ever seen balls hovering around them than rising overhead is that's not where the lights are, and that their sources are elsewhere. One piece of advice that Todorani and the other Hessdalen researchers appear to have failed to heed is that given by Marcia Adams of the International Earthlight Alliance in her 2006 paper titled Der Navigation Artifacts near the Hessdalen Valley, Norway. She states, Earthlight researchers must be vigilant for artifact lights. In addition to vehicle headlights, house and ranch lights, stars, planets, photomorgana mirages, and natural aerial phenomenon, an important source of artifact lights are commercial and private aircraft operating near observation sites. Using simple commercially available navigation software, she identified a number of air traffic corridors, navigational stations, and local airports. These included one corridor that I found particularly intriguing, a corridor 18 degrees north from the Tolgiver, proceeding directly up the Hessdalen Valley, straight toward the automated measuring station, from exactly the direction it's facing. As previously discussed on other Skeptoid episodes dealing with so-called ghost lights, the Marfa lights in Texas, the Minutes light in Australia, and the Brown Mountain lights in North Carolina, there are known physical phenomena that can account for such reports. A better way to investigate the Hessdalen phenomenon would be to at least consider the causes found for these other lights. The Minutes light was proven to be a sort of thermal lensing effect, where warm air collected in ground topography underlaid cooler night air, and reflected lights from over the horizon, an effect we call a superior mirage. However, the Marfa and Brown Mountain lights turned out to be misidentifications of conventional lights in a direct line of sight, probably distorted by similar lensing effects. Such thermal irregularities were found in both places. In the case of Marfa, they were car headlights along two prominent highways. At Brown Mountain, it was the headlight of a regularly scheduled locomotive and a plane far away, as well as some other lights. The majority of the images captured by the Hessdalen Automated Measurement Station look exactly like the high-powered landing lights of aircraft following the corridor north from the Tolgiver. Trondheim Airport, TRD, is due north of Oslo, Norway. This route passes almost directly over Hessdalen. When the Hessdalen lights first started receiving attention in 1981, charter passenger service between Oslo and Trondheim was in its infancy, having begun with only a few flights in 1976. By 1982, Trondheim had opened its third terminal, and by the time Scandinavian Airlines acquired the local carriers in 2002, the Oslo-Trondheim route was the single busiest in all of Norway. Trondheim is about 40 nautical miles north of Hessdalen, and at that range the use of aircraft landing lights is discretionary. Some pilots will have them on, some won't, and weather often affects their choice. Note the automated station's finding that the lights usually appear between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., when it's dark and the air traffic is active, and more often in the winter, when more pilots like to use the landing lights during flight amid clouds. Whether the Hessdalen lights are mysterious balls of unexplained plasma or not, extremely bright lights matching the photographs would have been visible in the sky on many nights. If you've ever stood near the approach to a major airport and looked downrange at night, you've seen the sky dotted with strange, stationary glowing orbs. At the very same time Project Hessdalen was building its automated measurement station, and UFO researchers were furiously weaving together complex hypotheses about plasma and nanoparticles and electromagnetism and mini black holes. The skies above were filled with the largest number of these strange, stationary glowing orbs that Scandinavian Airlines had ever put up there. By no means am I suggesting that aircraft landing lights are the cause of all the Hessdalen sightings, but I have found no mention by any of the project's lead scientists that any serious effort was made to match the lights to aircraft flyovers in an attempt to falsify this particular hypothesis. Indeed, a few of the photographs from the automated station show lights down at ground level. Highway 576 winds along the floor of Hessdalen Valley, so it would also be necessary to attempt to correlate ground-level sightings with automobile traffic, which is exactly how the Marfa Lights case was solved in Texas. The effects seen at Marfa and in Australia of distant light sources appearing to be nearby, as liquidy and hovering orbs, can be quite impressive and persuasive, and it would be presumptuous of the Hessdalen investigators not to exhaust that possibility. Since we have an excellent and proven explanation for identical light phenomena in other parts of the world, that explanation is perhaps more likely than the list of exotic science fiction avenues of investigation listed by Dr. Toderini. Investigate with an open mind. It's tough, because it means you have to be open to the possibility that you have not, in fact, discovered whole new branches of physics. 6. Time-traveling hipster. A photograph taken in 1941 at the reopening of a Canadian bridge has become notorious in recent years. Why? Because the photo depicts a mysterious man dressed in a fashion that was way too modern for 1941. Did he travel back in time? The photo of the time-traveling hipster was first made available to the public in 2004 at the Bralorn Pioneer Museum in British Columbia, Canada. The identities of the photographer and the people in the photo are unknown. It simply had a note on the back stating that it was taken in 1941 at the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in British Columbia, after a flood in November 1940. When the picture was digitized and made it onto the internet in 2010, a number of websites picked up on the mysterious modern man in the crowd. Dressed in sunglasses and a modern-looking t-shirt and brandishing a camera, he looked very out of place, standing amid a group of men in suits with 40s fedora hats. It was claimed that his attire was too modern and not of the styles worn in the 1940s, and his camera was too small to have existed during that period. Was he a time traveler? An imposter there to take photos of the bridge for his bosses in the future? Proof: the photo was authentic. Of course there were people who alleged that the photo was a fake, or that the modern man was photoshopped into it. Days after the original photo surfaced on the internet, another photo, this one taken from a different angle, was published. The hipster was still present in the photo. Yes, it could be that both photos are fakes, but in December 2010, Evgeny Belamutenko and his colleague from ANTV, a television channel in Russia, located the original photograph at the Bralorn Pioneer Museum. They determined that it was real, authentic and unedited. Not so modern after all. Snopes.com reports that the tale of the time-traveling hipster, which has attained urban legend status since 2010, is false. It points out that, while the man is significantly more casual than the other people around him, his clothes and camera were readily available in the 1940s. Wrap-around glasses with protective side shields were apparently available in the 40s, they just weren't widespread or popular. His t-shirt is said to bear the logo of the Montreal Maroons, a hockey team that played in the National Hockey League in Canada between 1924 and 1938. And his camera could easily be one of several portable Kodak cameras that were available in 1941. Case closed. Snopes.com may have come to a definitive conclusion about the time-traveling hipster, But not everyone buys it. Some people argue that the particular sunglasses worn by the hipster were not actually available in 1941. While debunkers have tried to use a photo of Barbara Stanwyck wearing similar sunglasses in the film Double Indemnity, this argument fails for two reasons. Firstly, the film is from 1944, 3 years after the hipster photo, and secondly, when you look closely, the glasses are not the same anyway. They don't actually have side shields like the hipsters, they're just casting a shadow on the side of her face. Still, the general consensus, which I'm inclined to agree with, is that nothing depicted in the photo would have been impossible in 1940. The fact that the man looks out of place is because he had an unusual fashion style, not because he's a time traveler. Except, I did some further research and found YouTube user Vander V. He claimed to know the time-traveling hipster. He said he's of German descent and goes by the name Tom, and claimed to have pictures of Tom in other times and eras. I was intrigued and my imagination was stirred, for all of 2 minutes. Several YouTubers asked to see these pictures and were unimpressed, arguing that it was clearly not the hipster in Vander V's pictures, but another dude with completely different hair. Some users accused Vander V of forgetting to take his meds, a very real possibility. 7. Black Knight Satellite Mystery. There are around 3,000 human-made satellites in working order around the Earth. However, if the debris of old and damaged satellites are taken into account, the number increases dramatically. Ever since the Soviet Union launched the very first artificial satellite into orbit in 1957, various countries around the world have sought to compete, and satellites today are used for communication, navigation and exploration. Satellites are often visible passing overhead as the sunlight reflects back towards the Earth. One of them is impossible to miss, the largest satellite currently in orbit, the International Space Station, at a huge 100 meters across. However, these satellites are relatively unexciting in comparison to the mystery surrounding one very old dark satellite. Legend has it that in orbit around the Earth is a mysterious, dark object which dates back perhaps 13,000 years. Its origin and purpose are inscrutable. Dubbed the Black Knight, this elusive satellite has allegedly been beaming signals towards the Earth and inspected by NASA astronauts, yet only a few on Earth officially know of its existence. The origin of the ominous name is part of the enigma. It is impossible to discover who first called it this or indeed why. Humans have only in the last 60 years had the technology to launch a man-made object into space, so what is the logical explanation of tales of an alien intruder on our doorstep? The Tesla transmissions. The first apparent part of this story begins with signals heard by Nikola Tesla, 1856 to 1943. A brilliant Serbian inventor, and described by many thanks to his often eccentric behavior and opinions as a genuine mad scientist, who spent most of his career in the USA. He was an electrical engineer and produced works which explored the idea of radio and wireless transmissions. In 1899, he reportedly intercepted a signal unlike any of the natural sources from Earth, such as electrical storms, that he had already investigated in his experiments. Instead, he announced that regular signals must be coming from an intelligent outside source, potentially inhabitants of Mars. Tesla never claimed to have heard signals from a satellite orbiting Earth. Today there are those who say he was listening to a transmission from an orbiting satellite of unknown origin, later called by some the Black Knight. It is slightly more likely, though still very far from probable, that what was Tesla detected was not an orbiting satellite but instead signals emitted from natural objects. Today we know of some natural extraterrestrial repeating sources such as pulsars. These are fast-spinning neutron stars which emit a rhythmic signal. They were first discovered in 1967 by Northern Irish astrophysicist Jocelyn Bell Burnell, 1943. Until certain of their origin, they were jokingly nicknamed the Little Green Men signals. Tesla was not hearing the signals from pulsars though, and was completely unaware of the nature of what he had really detected, if indeed he picked up anything at all. Tesla apparently never tried to repeat his observations, claiming that other matters took priority. An astonishingly casual response to so significant a claim. The Black Knight decoded. In the 1920s, anomalous signals were again detected by amateur radio operators. These were originally of earthly origin, but their timing was bizarre. A signal would be received, then a second repeated signal received a few seconds later. These long-delayed echoes, LDEs, were difficult to explain in terms or radio waves bouncing off atmospheric layers. In 1973, Scotsman Duncan Lunan, 1945, went back to these signals to see if could make sense of them. Miraculously, by plotting the delay times against the order in which the echoes were received, he could create what appeared to be star charts and diagrams. By deciphering them, Lunan decided that the signals were actually messages transmitted by a probe originally from the star Epsilon Bootes, ISA, which had been lurking near the moon for the past 13,000 years. Lunan is not a professional astronomer but instead a science communicator and science fiction author with a flair for outre ideas, but nevertheless the name Black Knight is never mentioned by him, nor has he personally linked his Epsilon Bootes hypothesis with the Black Knight. Others seem to be responsible for this. Another story dating back to the early 1950s claimed to refer to an apparition of the Black Knight reports the detection of a signal of by an object in orbit. This was a time of deep suspicions held by the two superpowers on either side of the Pacific. Neither the Americans nor the Soviets had the ability to place an object into any kind of an orbit at that time. Yet the discovery of an Earth-orbiting satellite was reported in a couple of newspapers from the time, and the respected astronomer Clyde Tombaugh, discoverer of Pluto, is said to have been involved. However, the article's actually a couple of synopses of a book by the ufological author Donald Keyhoe, 1897 to 1988. I'm sure these promotional newspaper articles had been great for sales of the book. Alias Corona. A few years later, the Black Knight seemed to have made another appearance when American newspapers reported in 1960 that there was an unusual object in polar orbit. By then both superpowers had satellites in equatorial orbit, but polar orbit meant that the satellite could see every part of the Earth, yet neither country admitted owning it. This may seem strange, but remember that this was a time of deep-rooted suspicion and espionage, not just with each other but now seemingly with extraterrestrials too. Declassified information now released from that time suggested that object was connected to a Corona spy satellite under disguise. At the time, the U.S. Discoverer research satellite program was actually a cover for the Corona project intended to photograph sites in the USSR. The world was bracing itself for nuclear destruction, coming close to a nuclear war in the Cuban Missile Crisis just 2 years later. Had this information been released at the time, perhaps the Cold War would have indeed heated up. The mystery object reported was almost certainly an unexpectedly large piece of debris from Discoverer 8 released when it jettisoned its film recovery capsule, known as a bucket. Discoverer 8's bucket was lost as the satellite's eccentric orbit made it impossible to recover. The satellite itself burned up on re-entry in March 1960. Presumably the debris fell into the atmosphere too around this time. For any story or conspiracy to have credibility, it always helps to get someone high-profile on board. In the case of the Black Knight, Project Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper, 1927 to 2004, is a prime example. Cooper announced seeing many UFOs throughout his career. So when it was claimed that he saw green lights belonging to the Black Knight on his pioneering Mercury mission into Earth orbit with ground control radar also allegedly picking up something inexplicable, it is often believed to be true. However, Cooper produced transcripts saying that on the Mercury flight he never saw anything. When you have admitted seeing UFOs once, perhaps other details of when and where often become less significant. The STS-88 encounter. The most recent and most cited evidence for a mystery satellite from beyond dates from 1998. The crew of Space Shuttle orbiter Endeavour photographed an unusual object in low Earth orbit, but not a polar orbit. These images are often labeled as the most definite proof of this satellite. However, on more careful analysis, this strange structure seems more like a piece of space debris. In actual fact, this black object is probably a thermal blanket, to be precise. a trunnion pin thermal cover that had become dislodged during a NEVA. Mission STS-88 was the first American mission to begin construction of the International Space Station. The Russians had already placed the Zarya module in orbit, so this mission was to connect Zarya to the American Unity module. The crew achieved all objectives of their mission, including installing handrails and testing a safety device to prevent astronauts drifting into space should they become detached. However, there were a few hitches along the way. Initial alignment of the modules did not quite work, so as the shuttle's robotic arm loosened its grip to try again, several items floated away, including the thermal blanket covering, which is the mysterious-looking image captured in the photo. According to the respected space historian James Oberg in his superb history of the incident STS-88 and the Black Knight, the lost blanket burned up when it fell out of orbit about a week after it was lost. None of this information supports claims of the Black Knight, the dark satellite. However, there really was a Black Knight rocket. It was a British rocket used to test the design of a re-entry vehicle for the Blue Streak missile between 1958 and 1965. This one is not quite as mysterious. So although claims of an ancient 13,000-year-old satellite originally from a star in the constellation of Bootes has reportedly been spotted and photographed by NASA astronauts as it travels in polar orbit, in reality this is not the case. Black Knight is a jumble of completely unrelated stories, reports of unusual science observations, authors promoting fringe ideas, classified spy satellites, and people over-interpreting photos. These ingredients have been chopped up, stirred together and stewed on the internet to one rambling and inconsistent dollop of myth. The universe is a big place, and astronomers are trying to find signs of other life. Some have even searched for alien probes near Earth. However, the Black Knight satellite is not the answer, and it never has been. 8. 9/11 attack, South Tower woman. Who was she? Does anyone know? Did any New York newspaper ever identify her? Yet she remains indelible in the photograph, her image forever poised at the brink, appearing almost calm, although her fear must have been overpowering. She stands at the edge of an abyss, her arm grasping a wrecked window frame while her foot slips perilously close to space. Befitting the moment, her image grows indistinct the more one tries to focus. We see her standing there, minutes from death. Forthright in appearance, she appears almost delicate nonetheless, like a curious child. Yet she must have been terrified. She must have been shocked. But mostly she must have been very brave. The woman at the edge of the abyss was someone's daughter, sister, lover, friend. Actually, there are two women in the maw of wreckage. The one we see stands courageously at the very edge of the North Tower. To her right, another woman sprawls at the edge of the debris. How hot can it be? Peering down, suffering from vertigo. Farther to the right, a man waits in the shadows, stunned, shirtless. We owe this unknown woman an enormous debt, every one of us who stubbornly serves the painful truth in whatever fashion against formidable resistance. She may as well be Lady Liberty, poised before a great chasm, uncertain whether to stand strong and await rescue, or fling herself down, a symbol of a doomed republic. We owe this unknown woman on the 94th floor a great debt because she bravely made herself visible. She did not cower in the shadows. The woman at the edge of the abyss is the bold rebuttal to the overwhelming lies of the state and the state-supported media. Why? Recall that well-paid experts testified that all three towers collapsed due to intense heat. Yet here we see a pair of women, heavily dressed, standing on what should have been red-hot steel. Does she, and her supine twin, look ready to melt? At that exact moment, numerous New York firefighters struggled upwards, burdened with equipment, confident they could contain the fires. They radioed back that they could knock down the fire. Ironically, at about the time of their radio report, the building was knocked down on them. Never before had one building collapsed, and certainly not three of them, so stoutly built. The official story of the collapse of the trio of WTC buildings is an obvious government lie. But cracks are beginning to show in the official version. Finally, patriotic Americans are beginning to trickle forward and say what these women knew all along. The WTC fires were a classic case of smoke and mirrors, a nefarious crime certainly, an act of terrorism assuredly. The state either conspired to kill the young woman or allowed others to do it for draconian reasons. Photos show people walking around in the hole in the North Tower where 10,000 gallons of jet fuel were supposedly burning, said Morgan Reynolds, former chief economist for the U.S. Department of Labor under George W. Bush. By the time the South Tower was hit, most of the North Tower's flames had already vanished, burning for only 16 minutes. The fire did not grow over time, probably because it quickly ran out of fuel and was suffocating rather than the sprinkler system dousing the fires. Morgan may be the highest government official thus far to speak openly about the crime lurking behind the crime. If demolition destroyed 3 steel skyscrapers at the World Trade Center on September 11, then the case for an inside job and a government attack on America would be compelling, said Reynolds. Why should anyone care about an unknown woman they do not even know that no one knows? Aside from her courage, would you have stood so close to the edge? She repudiates a great lie. That intense and prolonged fires melted steel, weakening the trusses that this young woman allegedly stood upon, causing not 1, not 2, but 3 buildings to collapse. She repudiates the official government version of events, lies which all too frequently becomes a nation's history. Thus we owe her a great debt of gratitude. Had she not stood there, within view of everyone, the government might have gotten away with claims of blast furnace temperatures sufficient to weaken steel. Instead she stood her ground, so to speak, until explosions occurred and brought those 3 buildings down around her and almost 3,000 others. The woman at the edge of the abyss is Rachel Corrie. She is the ghost of Joan of Arc, and she is every witch falsely accused, sentenced, and burned at Salem. The woman at the abyss is every victim of a great crime, a great cover-up, and a great lie, perpetrated by the state for the benefit of the state. She is your daughter, your friend, your sister. Do not forget her. 9. Skunk Ape. The first time Dave Shealy saw a skunk ape, he says, he was 10 years old. It was 1974, a few years after his father had come upon a set of footprints left by the creature, an Everglades version of Bigfoot named for its supposedly pungent odor. Dave was out deer hunting with his older brother, Jack, in the swamp behind his house, in what's now Big Cypress National Preserve, when he encountered the ape incarnate. It was walking across the swamp, and my brother spotted it first. But I couldn't see it over the grass. I wasn't tall enough, Shealy says. My brother picked me up, and I saw it, about 100 yards away. We were just kids, but we'd heard about it, and knew for sure what we were looking at. It looked like a man, but completely covered with hair. He and his brother stared at the creature, mouths agape, but almost at the same time, as he tells it, the skies opened and rain poured down. The ape hurried away, into the cypress hummocks scattered amongst the marsh. Holy crap, he remembers thinking. I finally saw this damn thing, and it got away, just like that. But the fleeting moment left an indelible impression on young Shealy, who's now 50 years old. In the decades since, he's relentlessly pursued skunk apes and seen them, he says, on 3 other occasions. He's written a field guide, made TV appearances, continually investigated reported sightings, and established a skunk ape research headquarters on his property, where tourists can learn all about the legendary creature. He bills himself as the Jane Goodall of skunk apes. I am the expert, he told a Bigfoot website last year, the state and county expert on the Florida skunk ape, and have been for years. In July 2000, he captured one of his encounters on video. In the grainy daytime footage, shot from hundreds of feet away, the creature spends a minute or so moseying around in a hammock of palm trees. Then, shortly after, it begins striding across the open swamp. At about 1:48 in the video below, it breaks into a longland run, as though suddenly aware it's being watched, escaping into a grove of palm trees. Shealy notes that, at the time, the swamp was covered by over a foot of water, making the animal's speed, which he estimates to be 22 miles per hour, impossible for any human to achieve. But it's extremely hard to watch this video and see anything but a guy in a gorilla suit, hurrying across the swamp. This impression is especially concerning because, according to any respected biologist, the skunk ape does not exist. People report seeing this mythical creature from time to time, says Bob DeGrose, a public affairs officer with the preserve. But there has never been a substantiated sighting of the skunk ape that was verified by National Park Service wildlife staff. Critics point out that, despite the dozens of unrelated ongoing research projects conducted in the Everglades that use motion-activated trail cameras, no one has ever captured indisputable proof of the skunk ape or come upon the remains of one. The empirical evidence is extremely weak, says Sharon Hill, a researcher and columnist for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry who's written about Bigfoot, the skunk ape and other mythical creatures. It's almost entirely eyewitness testimony, which is the most unreliable evidence you can have. Sheely responds by observing that things decompose quickly in the swamp, and that, at 2.2 million acres, it's the largest area of protected land east of the Mississippi, most of it rarely visited, both true. It's easy to imagine, he argues, that a handful of reclusive animals could live in it essentially unnoticed and leave virtually no evidence. I know what I've seen, he says. For someone who hasn't come here and put in the time to say otherwise doesn't really matter to me. To a curious observer, all this prompts an important question. Is Sheely a visionary biologist, a mistaken eyewitness, or an enterprising fraud? 10. The Madonna with Saint Giovannino and a UFO. Is there a UFO in the Madonna with Saint Giovannino? Madonna with Saint Giovannino was a 15th century painting at the center of a debate that has been going on for decades. Ancient alien theorists believe there is clearly a UFO in the background sky. Other historical paintings also depict strange objects in the sky, and this, say alien theorists, supports the argument that aliens have been coming to our planet and interacting with humans for millennia. First, this article will discuss the artist most often credited with this work, and also the controversy surrounding the true artist. Then it will present some information about religious symbology used during the Florentine Renaissance, and you can examine the strange UFO painting and decide for yourself whether or not you think the object is of alien origin. Galanteio, the credited author. Domenico Galanteio is most often credited with painting the Madonna with Saint Giovannino during the 15th century. Galanteio was born to a family in Florence during the Renaissance period in 1449. His father was a goldsmith and became well known for making the metal garlands that Renaissance women wore around their heads. Thus, the family acquired the name Galanteio, garland maker. Domenico Galanteio started out as an apprentice under his father. Giorgio Vasari, an art historian who lived during the 1500s, said Galanteio used to paint the people who would go into his father's shop. However, he later apprenticed with master painters and eventually set up his own art studio. His style of blending everyday scenes with religious themes, such as the one in the Madonna with Saint Giovannino, made Galanteio very popular. He eventually became one of the most renowned Renaissance painters and was especially popular for his beautiful frescoes. Controversy surrounding the true painter. Although most articles credit Galanteio, the true painter of the Madonna with San Giovannino is in dispute. Two artists also named as possible authors of the painting are Jacopo del Soleil and Sebastiano Mainarti. Mainarti was an apprentice and brother-in-law of Galanteio, who supervised Mainarti as his master. The close association might explain why there is some confusion about the true artist. Description of the painting. The Madonna with Saint Giovannino depicts the Madonna with the infant Jesus and Saint John. In the background there is a man with his hand held up to his face, as if shielding his eyes from a bright light. By his side is a dog with its mouth slightly open. Both the man and dog appear to be looking up at something in the sky. The object appears as a dark oval structure with light rays projecting out from all angles. The painting currently hangs in the Palazzo Vecchio in Venice as part of a collection known as the Lozer Bequest. The American collector, Charles Alexander Lozer, generously left his collection of art to the city of Florence after his death in 1928. Religious symbology or alien spaceship? Some people believe that the UFO in the painting is just one of the many representations of the gospel passage, "Shepherds abiding in the field keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, an angel of the Lord come upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them." Gospel of Luke 2-8. Other paintings from the Florentine Renaissance period depict a similar nativity scene with a shepherd and dog looking at a celestial object in the sky. The objects were most commonly angels and stars, as the Annunciation or announcement across the land often accompanied the nativity scenes. However, across different times periods, God, angels, and other divine entities have often been portrayed in various ways in the form of fire, stars or comet-like objects, clouds, or on golden chariots flying through the sky. Below are two clear examples of angels that appear to be coming down on a heavenly cloud. The angels are emitting beams of golden light. These pieces are excerpts from the Nativity and the Adoration of the Christ Child, and were painted during the 15th century during the Renaissance by Vincenzo Farpa. The UFO debate. Whatever the artist intended, there will always be those who insist that the strange object in the painting is an ancient alien spacecraft. After all, there are no wings or body of an angel, which was the typical way to portray angels. Is it really alien, or is it just misinterpretation and a lack of understanding of religious iconography throughout art history? If these types of images really depict true alien spaceships, why were they so often shown within religious contexts, when in the past the Catholic Church has shunned science and anything that may have conflicted with the Bible? Recently, the Vatican has acknowledged the possibility of life on other planets, and indicates that they too are God's creatures. So now, concepts of religion and aliens may be able to coexist in our modern world. But what about during the Renaissance? 11. The strange Falcon Lake UFO incident. Falcon Lake incident. The Falcon Lake incident is a reported unidentified flying object, UFO, encounter near Falcon Lake, Manitoba, Canada claimed to have occurred on May 20, 1967 by Stephen Michalak. He had taken a short vacation in Whiteshell Provincial Park to prospect veins of quartz near Falcon Lake when he spotted two cigar-shaped objects descending, one of which landed near him. Michalak says he saw a door open and heard voices from inside the object, after which he tried to make contact in English and other languages but got no response. He claims to have burned his hand while attempting to examine colorful glass found around the object and seen a grid-like exhaust vent that expelled gas that burned his clothing. The UFO. According to authors Chris Rutkowski and Jeff Dittman, Michalak, a resident of Winnipeg, Manitoba, had taken a short vacation in Whiteshell Provincial Park to prospect veins of quartz near Falcon Lake when he spotted two cigar-shaped objects descending, one of which landed near him. Michalak says he saw a door open and heard voices from inside the object, after which he tried to make contact in English and other languages but got no response. He claims to have burned his hand while attempting to examine colorful glass found around the object and seen a grid-like exhaust vent that expelled gas that burned his clothing. Rutkowski and Dittman write that Michalak felt pain and sickness after his encounter and was treated at a hospital, initially claiming the burns were caused by airplane exhaust. Michalak's family physician reportedly stated that Michalak was confused and dazed but rational, and showed signs of hair loss and a series of raised oval-shaped sores on Michalak's chest and abdomen in a grid-like pattern, similar to a first-degree burn. Reportedly, health problems plagued Michalak for several months, including lack of appetite, weight loss, swelling, and fainting spells, despite a Mayo Clinic psychiatrist stating that Michalak was free of significant mental or emotional illness. The investigation. By late June 1967, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, had taken an interest in Michalak's claims. They could not identify the site on their own, and on June 1 they brought Mitrust with them. However, Mitrust could not locate the site, which raised further doubts regarding his claim. The RCMP also confirmed that Mitrust had consumed multiple bottles of beer the night before the sighting. By June 26, Mitrust had located the site and recovered personal belongings he had left there. The RCMP obtained soil samples from the location, which they tested for radioactivity. The tests were negative. On July 28, Mitrust and RCMP officers together identified a semicircle on the rock face at the scene, 15 feet in diameter, where the moss had been somehow removed. There were traces of radiation in a fault in the rock across the center of the landing spot. No trace of radiation was found around the outer perimeter of the circle or in the moss or grass below the raised portion of the rock. The radioactive material found in the rock fault was radium-226, a naturally occurring isotope in wide commercial use and also found in nuclear reactor waste. They concluded that the level of radiation posed no danger to humans in the area. Mitrust died in 1999, age 83.